his house because he's isolated by himself. And if he did like, it's our house.
Ridiculous.
Hi, I'm Kat.
And I'm Gabe. And we're the Ghouls Next Door.
Talking about spooky stuff. Look at us being unison.
We did it. Yeah, you just have to be confident. You just have to go into it confident and then it works.
Yeah.
That's all it takes. Yes, happy February still. We are continuing our For the Culture series. Last week was kind of fun, and it was a kids film, and it was like wacky and vampires and gentrification, and ooh, so fun. This week,
there were
so
sad
much.
parts, but there were also fun parts where I feel like this is just kind of returning back to sad times, whole times.
Yeah, but doing a really good job of what we love about horror, I think.
Oh, for true.
The overall kind of thing is that we are seeing a film that I think is top up there of like, this is how you do horror and trauma. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just that. And so today we're going to be talking about His House, which is a story about South Sudan refugees who seek to immigrate to the UK and have all kinds of trauma and things that they're dealing with by Remi Weekes. So we felt it would be important to kind of highlight their experience that is being represented on screen, not just like what we're seeing with the spooks and stuff. So for Kat's History Corner that we're going to hop into, we are going to be talking about that immigrant experience, as well as, you know, what compels people to leave and what needs to change in the countries that people are seeking refuge in as well.
Yeah, so like usual, our media is saying something. Like, His House is a film focused on a couple from war-torn South Sudan and their journey to England. The story is about real things. This is like real current, like extra current is happening, like within 2017 to now. So just so you know, if you didn't know, now you do. So there are many Sudanese people trying to enter the UK because of dangers and violence in Sudan. For many, seeking refuge in the UK is an essential means of survival and worth the very dangerous journey to get there, a journey many people. In an ODI article titled "Why So Many Sudanese Are Prepared to Risk Their Lives to Reach the UK" by Margie Buchanan Smith, an interview with a migrant from Darfur that took place in 2017 explained, they choose to migrate because staying in Darfur means a slow death. Because of this, a quick death seems better than a slow one. So the risk is kind of like deemed worth it. And the reason it's a risk is because a lot of people who are trying to get to the UK, there's some rules associated with asylum seekers that they're only able to claim asylum in the place they land. So the first place they land on European soil is where they're supposed to claim asylum, and there are different countries with different asylum rules and like asylum quality. And specifically for Sudan, there's a lot of like second English speakers. So because of the previous relationship with the UK in terms of colonization. So Sudan used to be occupied by the UK. So a lot of people know at least a little bit of English. So it's a little bit of an easier transition. So people are trying to get to the UK, but one of the only ways to get there is through the English Channel, which is by boat. And usually those boats are not very good boats. They're little boats that they're putting a lot of people onto to try to make this journey. Whereas like if they landed in, say, France and then traveled up to UK and could still claim asylum where they wanted to within Europe, the journey would probably be slightly less dangerous, but because of like the rules and kind of strictness around this, wherever you land first is where you have to claim. A lot of people take riskier routes to get there. But why do people want to leave Sudan? I vaguely remember learning about the Darfur genocide when I was in high school. That's part of the reason. So specifically, I Googled something on Wikipedia, and it said in 2013, the United Nations estimated that 300,000 people had been killed during the genocide. In response, the Sudanese government claimed the number and the death was grossly inflated, but by 2015, it had estimated the death toll stood between 100,000 and 400,000. This was because of like basically war that was taking place. There was an agreement formed between the rebels and the government taking place in this war in 2011, but that did not end the danger. In addition to Darfur specifically being affected in Sudan, it kind of spread to areas surrounding Darfur, so in neighboring Kordofan and the Blue Nile state. So kind of, if you would imagine, like there is a lot of persecution and violence happening in Sudan, people are trying to escape that. It's a very valid and real reason to try to travel somewhere else and claim asylum. So in a study completed by Why So Many Sudanese Are Prepared to Risk Their Lives to Reach the UK article, they provided substantial evidence that there was persistent and systemic persecution, attack, arrest, and surveillance specifically of young men from regions of Sudan, especially if they were from an ethnic group associated with the rebellion against the former dictator, President Bashir. So the article goes on to cite that many Darfuris who left Sudan to migrate to Europe had spent much of their lives in camps. Some had experienced multiple displacements within Sudan. They had been faced with discrimination in the workplace, effectively living in a police state. The depths of despair experienced by young Sudanese was striking.
Yeah, it's very much reminding me of like La Llorona with the genocide that was happening there and how they were seeking out people who they said were like a part of a rebellion, even though they weren't. Or interesting, like kind of comparing this to what's happening in Mexico too, from the Tigers Are Not Afraid, where that was like so much of like the women and children, and this is so much of the men that are experiencing that trauma, and like young boys who like get abducted to be put into those armies.
Yeah, and it seems specifically like ethnically motivated. This is like kind of like if you fall under a certain ethnic group, like you are subject to this. And I think it was really telling. I remember when we were watching the film, Rial had 2 tattoos that said she was from 2 different groups, so that she didn't belong anywhere, but that basically she could freely travel between and anywhere and be considered safe. So that's what that kind of like made me think of after reading about it more. But yeah, we kind of touched a little bit on why the UK. There are a handful of reasons. The biggest ones that stood out were the colonial ties, English language. It's an easier transition, but also lots of Sudanese people have already traveled to the UK to claim asylum over the years. So it does kind of lend to having friends or family or people you used to know some semblance of home in a foreign land. So lots of people try to travel there because they know of other people who are maybe more established and can help them and like build a sense of community. But the journey itself is extremely dangerous, and the laws make it even more difficult. In an interview with Darfuris in the UK in 2017, they had records claiming that to reach the UK, people would travel under buses, in the backs of lorries, which Google told me meant big trucks, and on unsafe rubber boats. I know we get a lot of glimpses into the journey over in terms of boat travel. And I remember when watching, since I was not yet, educated on I was like wondering like why boat travel was a specific route that seemed to be highlighted. So it makes sense that they chose to show that because that's what's actually happening.
Yeah.
In another article I read on Independent titled What's Next for Asylum Seekers from War-Torn Sudan by Paul Peachy, it is further confirmed that the journey to the UK is really treacherous. In many ways, it aligns with the deaths we see in the film and how real the trauma and the journey hits those who survive versus those lost along the way. A quote that hit especially hard for me was, "Some who make the crossing by sea say there's murder and rape on the boats, and that traffickers order people to jump overboard to their deaths just to avoid everyone sinking. We've spoken to some who've clung to the bottom of trucks, paying traffickers the last of their money to risk their lives to make the trip. Having faced all that, it's awful that they're treated like criminals here, and their claims for asylum are distrusted." So we kind of see this in the film when they first arrive, where they're in a detention center. Those detention centers are real.
Yeah.
They're kept in hostile, conditions where it's like this kind of pre-housing where everyone's kind of in one place. And even once they're offered some form of permanent housing, they're not allowed to select where they want to live. They're given a stipend. They're not allowed to work. They're kind of forced into this controlled, suspended poverty. You can't, when you're not allowed to work outside of the stipend you can't establish yourself in the community. You can't build something for yourself because you're really being monitored. Not, I guess, the same as it would be to be in a police state, but you're being monitored as if you're criminals and you're really just seeking help. Something else that kind of stuck out to me that was really a bummer is that these people really need mental health services in addition to the meager stipends and housing that they're given. They need help with post-traumatic stress disorder because they've experienced some really real trauma. And instead of looking at them when they're experiencing this trauma and experiencing this post-traumatic stress, there's this criminalization of them, this feeling that they're taking advantage, or there's distrust of them because there's always been a mental health stigma, but it especially I guess because there's this feeling that there's a drain on the resources that are available. It's deeply rooted probably in racism as well.
Well, it's how dare you come here and ask for our stuff, ask for more, you're lucky we're giving you whatever we're giving you, you should be thankful.
What's wild is no one owns anything. The planet belongs to everyone.
Yeah.
Before money existed, you just stuff was free. You didn't have to pay for the spot of land that you owned. Yeah. So it's very ridiculous that people are this is mine, and it's not.
Well, there's also that myth of, that there's not enough, right? And so it's there's not enough to go around, and if we give it to you, then we don't have any for us, which is not true. We have plenty. And honestly, we waste so much of our resources all the time. If we were just, getting over money and not focus on profit, and instead just gave people equal access to basic necessities, it would be fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's this kind of what we were saying in previous episodes, this inherent human are trash, people are trash element of self-preservation, and just being very inherently selfish, because they think it's the means of survival when, if a lot of people are purposely undereducated, people don't educate their population, so they don't realize what's happening. But in another article on the BBC titled "Migrant Crossing: What Happens to Migrants Who Reach the UK" by Alice Aiken, it goes through some of the struggles asylum seekers face. I mentioned some of them, but the amount of money that they're given and they're not allowed to work is ridiculous. So they are given £37.75 per week per household member, which translates to about $51.77 US dollars per week. So that is very little money.
Yeah.
If you lost all your belongings on the journey over, etc., you don't have the basic necessities and you're given such a small amount and not able to work to get more or given more, considering all of the things that these people have gone through to get here, to still be kind of in this suspended state of reality that's just kind of this awful cage.
Yeah, and it's there's also this
really
dichotomous expectation of them where they're you have to be an upstanding citizen and you're one of the good ones, so behave and like fight for your right to exist here, but also like you can't go out and work. You have to live in this one little place. Like you aren't a citizen. So it's just like, how can they act or, you know, live up to the expectations of being a citizen when you're not giving them the opportunity to do so? And instead you're setting them up for failure and then being like, oh, look, see, it just doesn't work out. We tried.
Yeah. And there's this super gross of like, basically trying to like get them to assimilate to British culture or UK culture that's like very gross, inherently racist, and like very much just like these people had lives before they came here. They should be able to hang on to their language and culture. That's like something that's important to them. It's not their fault that they had to make this journey. If anything, there's some information in terms of like the UK's involvement in Sudan specifically because of previously colonizing it, and also because of the United Nations was in some involvement as well in trying to like assist with the genocide, but they had recently pulled out a lot of their supports too. So it's kind of like you set this up for people to be in need, essentially. Because if you were over there colonizing, ruining the like, you know what I mean? Like that's what colonization is you gut all the resources out of that place and set up unstable situations, which is something the United States did a lot too. There's always like parts to play. And I guess like the UK really should acknowledge their part in creating these situations as well.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, also like here, right, like setting up those things, and kind of going back to what you were saying about like no one like really owns this, and also like everyone comes from somewhere. It's like thinking of America, like no one is truly American except for the native peoples. They are the ones who are here first. And so anyone else is either an immigrant or like, you know, a generation of immigrants, right? Like that's how that works. So it's absurd to expect recent immigrants to like adhere to these specific policies or what we deem as American when that's not really a thing, for one, because it's people from all over who do that. And it makes me also think like the hoops that they have to go through to be here. I know someone who had to go through citizenship when I was younger, and he like took the citizenship test. And I remember like him studying for it and all the information he had to know. And I was like, I don't know any of that as an American. And like my mom or like other like adults didn't know those answers. Like the fact that we're asking them to like essentially memorize this very specific representation of our country that our own citizens don't know inherently. And we're like holding them like, you have to work so much harder to belong here. And we just happen to be born in this place.
I mean, nationalism in itself is a form of violence.
Yes.
So it's gross, and people should stop doing that. They should stop just like thinking they're the best thing ever when the world belongs to no one. We're all going to die.
I mean, it's one planet, you know? Like,
yeah, we only get one.
We need to get over it. For sure.
And like the claim is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like you own nothing.
She's a plot of land.
Your money is an imagination thing. Like it was thought up. But that's all I got for my facts section.
All right.
Thank you.
We also watched stuff. Kat, if you want to tell us what this film is about.
Sure. His House from 2020, a refugee couple makes a harrowing escape from war-torn South Sudan, but then they struggle to adjust to their new life in an English town that has an evil lurking beneath the surface. This is directed by Remi Weekes.
Yes. Yeah, so right out the gate, this film is a phenomenal piece of social horror.
For sure,
that I feel like really encompasses the empathetic power of this genre of being able to put people into the shoes. Like how else would you show to an audience the PTSD and trauma that an immigrant experiences, and also like that struggle with, keeping yourself, who you are fundamentally, and also reworking that image to fit into the narrative that they need from you. And so I find that like one of the best parts of this film is that we can find fear in, like, you know, the spooks that are happening on screen, the monsters that are hiding in the shadows, but also the monsters that we find within ourselves and in those struggles. And it's like that internal battle. It does make me think of, like, and we'll discuss the ending at the end of this episode. So it's relative, like, no big spoilers until the end. It will give you a big warning beforehand. But I feel like this whole story tells us like a reimagining of the Telltale Heart, in that, you know, our choices ultimately haunt us. Right. And we wonder, did we do the right thing? And if we didn't, why did we do that thing? And so, yeah, I feel like Weekes was seeking to tell the story of the immigrant experience, obviously, and specifically the immigrant experience that is wrought with tragedy, impermanence, and loss. Because it's a very complex issue of figuring out where you're from, where you're going. That's kind of like the... this film was the first in a long time that I was actually genuinely afraid of. There were, you know, it has like the whispers and creatures in the darkness and fast inhuman footsteps that always get Kat and myself. And I'd even say, like, creatures that are, you know, Del Toro like in their creation of you know, like
they were scary.
And even more frightening, I think, is that battle of morality too, which is like what we strive for and love in horror. The film does try to tackle a lot of things, and usually, in my experience, that is a setup for failure. Usually it's like, oh, you're trying to juggle too much. Oh, you're gonna let one fail. You know, like we always say, like, don't
drop the ball kind of deal.
Whole butt one thing.
Whole butt.
But because all the things that Weekes is trying to accomplish are naturally intertwined with one another, they are results of each other, they are naturally, like, ingrained, it doesn't miss a beat. They all work. Like, I don't think there's not a single thing I could complain about with this film, honestly. Like, not a thing. And I find in the story a yearning to belong, to start anew, and also that grappling of our identity and a reconciliation with the things that we do out of desperation. Which is, like, the pivotal point of this film. We are first introduced to these characters when they are traveling by boat to Britain, which Kat talked about as, you know, being one of the main forms of transportation. And it is, like, utter chaos. They are taking on water. It is harrowing and scary just in that little journey. And we haven't even seen a monster. And when you're watching this, like, as a viewer myself, I couldn't help but ask, like, why? Like, what happened back there that they are willing to risk their lives on this rickety boat, like, in, you know, terrifying waters that are coming, like, clearly in danger, like, something brought them to this point. And after, you know, going over things like Tigers Are Not Afraid, it's like, obviously something was happening back there. But even still, like, I don't need to know the specifics. I just knew something awful had to have happened for them to be here and to want it so bad. And so, like, I think it's kind of interesting to have that not direct, like, answer. Like, we didn't see before that. Like, you don't get the answers until much later.
You don't get it till later.
And even still, you're like, I get it. I can buy that. Like, I totally understand, because it comes, like, in small, like, little trickling tidbits throughout. Like, we get little hints or we get stories from the characters, and then it comes into a big crashing wave at the end that you realize, like, what directly brought them here, what their journey was right before they got here. But you never doubt for, like, a moment that something awful happened, and that is why they're here. Because why else would they fight so hard in this, like, decrepit home to make it theirs while they're surrounded by strangers who don't want them there?
Yeah, and I think it was this very real portrayal of how trauma is processed. And you even have, like, this, because Rial's character, she's still very much, like, missing Sudan. Like, even with the trauma, she's kind of like willing to go back, even though he's not. Like, she's kind of has this very like dissociated view of like how it was beforehand, and that's something that's really real in how people process trauma. Is you can't process it till you stop running. Like, if you're running from a beast, you're not going to be focused on the beast so much until you've finished running and you take a pause and a deep breath. So like
adrenaline.
Yeah, you kind of have this, like, as you said, like slow trickle into them processing finally what actually happened. And this very like real, like kind of denial at first, and then like slow acceptance of like how awful things kind of were in the journey, and then also the before. The like going back, unfortunately, isn't an option. But it like took a long time to kind of accept that and get over that, because when you're not there anymore, you kind of have this like nostalgia, or maybe like misremembering, because trauma is kind of the way it solidifies in the brain. It messes with how you process your memories.
Yeah, and
so
I
just
mean,
thought that was done really beautifully.
Yeah, you probably also like compartmentalize like the horrific parts and hold on to the parts that were the everyday and the parts that you loved about it, because that's your home. That's, you know, that it wasn't all bad. Like, that's not how that works. And so you kind of hold on to that, and also like romanticize because of where you are now. And actually, so in an article on Collider that I found called His House, Director's Ending Explanation Finds Hope in the Haunting by Perry Nemiroff, director Remi Weekes discusses his intention to include the creeping and tantalizing fear trauma can leave you with. So very exactly like what you were saying, Kat. He says, yeah, and part of the story was the dangers of ignoring it, that you can try and ignore trauma, but the more you ignore it, the more it gets to you. It's more of the emotional, invisible pain of mental illness, which is what I guess the creature more represented. Because I think the PTSD representation in this film was really gut-wrenching. Like, in the beginning, when he is having that panic attack, and you are first kind of getting hints of a supernatural element, like, you reason as a viewer that this is just a personification of him going through this trauma and the stress that he is under of like trying to, you know, put on airs and exist in this world and forget what brought them here. And he's having that like whole attack, and you really empathize with Bol. And like, long before you even understand what caused this distress, like, and why he's being haunted, you are like, something is up. He is not okay, and it's scary, and it's heartbreaking. And it really is enough to realize that he is honestly in pain and kind of grasping with reality, and he's losing, honestly.
It was interesting too, like that we were able to root for him too. Like, I feel like we don't have that in movies like, was it The Shining that he goes crazy?
Yeah, Shining arguably goes crazy. I would say he was always crazy.
Yeah, but I guess like you have that whole like the whole idea, you're like, his house, oh God, he's gonna be doing something, like, oh no. But like, you really sympathize with him, which I feel like I haven't felt in other films as much, where like this guy goes like nuts, and like is like really, like, you don't have this like empathy, I guess, as much. At least I didn't, for other characters that I did have for him. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the comparison to The Shining of like because they are isolated. Even the fact that they can go outside, they like, what is outside for them? It's just an extension of their prison, you know? And so it does have that kind of what isolation can do when you're left alone with your thoughts. There's a lot of amazing things in this film, which like we do not have the time to go into all of them, but I'll try my best to pick out all of my favorite parts. One of the things I really enjoyed was the use of South Sudanese mythology and religion, as like grounding these characters and kind of fleshing out what the horrors were, because we don't really get to see that. But there's also like this strength in their understanding, and how like those horrors are actually nothing in comparison to the real things that they're suffering from. Rial's story about the Apeth, which is like the night witch, is essentially about how a good man wanted more, and then ended up stealing, and then is haunted by this Apeth because he stole from them. And it brings about, you know, his own demise. And in any other horror film, if we had a story in the middle of it that was like, let me tell you exactly what this film is, you know, we would be like, oh, good, you're just on the nose, you're telling us what it is. But this really, I felt, was a genuine story that didn't feel like it took away from it. It only added to what I was expecting and what I needed from it. And I think her emphasis on saying like this was a good man who had to resort to stealing, and it's never like she never says he became a bad man. It was like, this is a good man who resorted to stealing, and then he had to pay
it back.
And so you think while you're watching this, because she's very clearly saying this to Bol for a reason, and you're like, well, then what did this good man do? And why are they being haunted by this empath? And it's like, it's transformative for that. Because again, you're really feeling for Bol up until that moment. And then you're like, well, what happened? What's going on here? I found a real strength in Rial, who's played by Wunmi Mosaku from Lovecraft Country. She plays Ruby. And I loved her because she was not frightened by the ghosts or the empath witch. And that was really interesting to have a character who does that, like, and to say it was kind of like what I was hoping from in Vampires versus the Bronx when she was like, I'm Haitian, I'm not afraid of vampires. I was hoping that strength would come through there, and like the fact that like we like this culture has an understanding of the blending of worlds, and so there's like, we're not going to get spooked by a little bump in the night, right? And she explains like quite candidly that after everything that she's experienced, there is no way that specters are going to frighten her. She's like, you think I'm going to be afraid of this night witch? There's no way. And I haven't seen a character like Rial in horror in a long time, and I honestly can't even recall another character quite like her.
I would agree,
because she was really strong, but she was also vulnerable, because like you saw that her strength was like, she's got to hold up a lot, and she is fighting back in her own battles while also trying to support and be this partner and also like hold him accountable, and not even knowing what she's holding him accountable for because she's also repressing memories, right? I think one of the truly unsettling scenes with her is when she's lost in the cement labyrinth of this new neighborhood and like comes to, you know, these 3 young Black teenagers who are incredibly xenophobic. Like, even though she's Black, they're like, go back to Africa. Like, we hear our beloved attack the block accents from these youths, and they're so mean, and you're like, no. Trust, bruv.
I know.
And it was so heartbreaking. And I feel like that was a scene that got to me. Also later when she's like confronting her memories, which are very real. Those are really real events that happen to her. And that's scary. Like, those are scary things. Way more than like the creeping in the house. Like, I was like, this is terrifying. And she is really holding it together. And I feel like she was, you know, untouchable by any of the traditional haunts and horrors because of all that she's been through, and like, you know, was super powerful in that. Also, like you mentioned, Kat, her explaining the scarifying technique of having both representations of the tribes was her way of showing that she knows what it takes to survive, and that she will do whatever it takes to conform and exist and not be persecuted, which even means, you know, leaving your home and stripping away your most personal allegiances, and just to blend in and be safe. So already, like, we've seen it. Like, we've seen someone have to do it. No wonder she's going to understand that people do whatever it takes. Later, we see Bol, who's played by Sope Dirisu, do something similar when he burns their clothes and like all their belongings from Africa. And Rial is like upset. She even says like, this is the only thing I have from my father. They burn the only item they have of their daughter, Nyagak. And it's like, whoa, he is like actively like, no, this is our past. We have to fit in. We have to just get rid of that. And we see him later in the department store looking at the advertisement of this white family, and in the end he buys those items. That's how much he wants to fit in. And that actually reminded me of Jordan Peele's Us with Winston Duke's Gabe, and how he like bought a boat and he wore like these clothes and he had these like mannerisms because he was trying to replicate what he understood as wealth, and it just happened to be like white people wealth, right? Like he was just like playing this role and trying to fit in and trying to feel like he belongs there. And I would be remiss to not mention the amazing, stunning imagery and cinematography of this film, which was just like I was in awe the whole time. Not just of like the spooks, but also just the practical effects were really amazing, and added to that sense of dread and performance, even in that like bridge between what is real and what is like our trauma, kind of like seeping into what we're experiencing, which is kind of like Babadook. Like, in one of the scenes that will remain rent-free in my brain forever is where Bol is at the kitchen table and he's like angrily stabbing at his dinner with his knife and fork, which he's still getting used to using. And we're like slowly panning out, and you see like cracks in the foundation and everything that he has been slowly kind of like hitting at anyway, but we see the sky, or we see smoke, and we're like, what, has it always been that way? And as it slowly keeps coming back, you realize like, no, we're not even in the house anymore. This is just his house has been cut out, and it's now this like makeshift ship, and he's in the middle of the ocean in this dream sequence, covered in like, you know, dust and like, you know, surrounded by orange fog and the waves that are crashing around him. And it's like, whoa. Like, what am I experiencing right now? And I thought that was so amazing, because it is like this, like he is just in this situation, and it's so easy to like do dream sequences where they're really silly, especially in horror. And this was like, that's what trauma does. Like you don't even know it's real. And it kind of, you're walking this line between realities as they're just like folding into each other in your like current anxiety. Throughout the film, I found things that stuck with me weren't really the creatures so much, although they were super scary. And like, they were like intense, like Nyagak and her mask, and like them all coming in like these zombies from their journey, who, you know, didn't make it. And that guilt, that survivor's guilt that you can see personified there. Those were scary, but it was, I think, what was truly terrifying was how helpless it felt, as Bol is like spiraling out of control and losing his like mental stability. And there's like one of the most heartbreaking scenes is him in the social worker's office.
Oh my God, yeah.
And he's like broken down. He is dirty. They even like remark on him that he doesn't smell too good. And he is like at wit's end. Like he is snapped, because he's at this point where he really is wrestling. Like he knows why the ghosts are there, simultaneously is like denying why the ghosts are there. And he is asking for a different house because something is wrong with this one. And instead of compassion or understanding or an ounce of sympathy, he is met with like these snide remarks like, it's bigger than my house, or you know, emphasis on how he needs to be one of the good ones, which is just like every time
such a cringe.
And in an article on IndieWire called His House Review, Remi Weekes' thrilling debut sees the immigrant experience as a horror movie by writer David Elrich. He agrees with me on this fact and says, Weekes' conceit works best when shining a light on the most vulnerable members of a society, are those who can't risk asking for help. Bol is seduced by the promise of a new life, only to spiral into a Babadook-like battle against the trauma that followed him across the world. And I think there is a strength in battling our demons that's similar to what we saw in Babadook, in that it is a constant war. It's not like one battle that we fight and then we win. It's like, no, you have to learn to live with it. You have to learn to look it in the face and be like, no, we gotta coexist, because you're not going away, but I'm not going away either. And that's really shown in this film in a way that like we don't really see a lot in horror, where there's a sympathetic, understanding of mental illness that is like persistent, and not just like a one-off thing.
Yeah.
Like it's not like a haunting, like The Grudge where you leave the house. Like it's not that. It is like it's following you. And I think like, showing Bol ripping at this house and yelling in the face of the haunts and fighting back, and not backing down was a refreshing portrayal of a crumbling protagonist.
Yeah.
And even when he is falling apart, there's like a strength when he finally does kind of give in to this, and he accepts and acknowledges his own flaws and sins of the past, that were brought in by desperation. Like he's like, I'm sorry, this is what happened. And, like you said, in the end, can we blame him?
Yeah.
We totally understand what brought him here. We can't even be mad. Like, I mean, we're mad, but we're like, I'm more mad that life put you there. That life gave you that as your only option at the end of it. And I think that is the beauty of this film and the genre as a whole, like what potentially it could do. And it's that, we can have truly terrifying monsters as stand-ins for the monsters who are in our minds. And that we can watch a character that looks that monster in the eye and accepts their fate and fights back.
Yeah. This film should win awards. I don't know if it has. It should if it hasn't. And both actors 100% need to win awards, because there was like this really powerful, the way Bol's like eyes were whenever he smiled, you could see the like visceral pain that he was experiencing. He's trying so hard to just present himself as okay. And you mentioned the scene where he breaks the cup in his hand while smiling.
Yeah, when he's laughing.
Yeah, they need awards. They all need awards because were so powerful in their acting. Like it was so visceral and like authentic in terms of just like the emotion being portrayed, and you could see the pain in their eyes, and it was just like fantastic. Like you believed everything that was happening. You're like, I am terrified, both because monsters, and also just because this feels so like. Empathy kick in, like you're watching this and really like feeling for the people in the film, which is everyone should win awards.
And I mean, you bring up a good point, because horror is notably overlooked for awards, and isn't treated at all seriously. Like we have had outstanding performances by actors in the horror world, when we're even just thinking about Hereditary, and with Toni Collette, or Us with Lupita Nyong'o, or even people giving props to, and I agree because I think she did a great job, Elizabeth Moss in Invisible Man, and I think that these two in this film, like unfortunately, horror does not get its due diligence. Like people don't pay attention to it. It's discredited because of like slashers and such, for not understanding how important and necessary telling these stories are, and so hopefully we can look at a future where that changes and they do take horror seriously, because I agree that this is like
I think it will
acting.
I think it will, because I think our previous generations have been really focused on those rose-colored lenses for processing their own issues / forcing that kind of view on other people. Like their everything is okay dance has always been very pronounced, where I feel like now we're starting to really look at things and like be honest about them, and mental health acknowledgements have gone up. I think this is the time for horror because of like people finally kind of acknowledging it and looking it in its eyes for what it is. Not everybody, but we're seeing more of it, where people are waking up, I guess, to the reality of things. So I think if anything, if it was ever going to get recognition in terms of people being like, horror, I think we're getting there. We're approaching that lens.
I mean, it's enough, I think, even just that this was a project that was greenlit and taken seriously, and that Remi was able to create it. right? Like
Yeah.
that he was given the opportunity that, you know, maybe just a few years ago, honestly, a handful, he might not have. And that's what we see a lot. Like, we're slowly starting to see those stories that people have been like banging on the door, like, hey, let us in, let us in. We have this story to tell. And so many people being like, oh, we want
That
more white
sounds
people
sad.
story.
So no.
Yeah. Where's Freddie and Jason? No. Instead,
It's like the doctor when she was talking about her daughter. She's honest about what happened to her daughter. She's like, uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Like, I don't know how to react to that.
Exactly.
Instead of just like, all I'm asking is for you to listen. Absolutely. Kat, did you want to talk about the ending, or do we feel like we've kind of told the story enough that people can just watch it and see the ending for themselves?
I think people should watch it for themselves, honestly. Because I think the reveal means something. Like, you know, it really adds to it. And it kind of like ties the masterpiece into a bow at the end. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, which is rare because usually I just say things by accident all the time.
Yeah. Well,
self-control.
And I agree that it's like, you really, to get the full journey, like emotionally, you need to be asking yourself, what is it? What's going on? What's happening? And I would rather you find out through the characters than us. And so definitely watch this film. Highly recommend. It is on Netflix, which is like, oh, we left Shudder for a minute. But phenomenal film. And I give props to Netflix for housing it. And I really hope to see more. For our ratings, as we're kind of wrapping up, maybe we could say that if you like it, it's fighting your demons.
That's real. I thought of a ridiculous one that we do not have to use, but it made me laugh in my brain. Where if you didn't like it, it's like his house because he's isolated by himself. And if you did like it, it's our house.
Ridiculous. No, I want it to be our house.
No, I know. That's real. I'm just saying it was really funny in my brain. And I wanted to say it, but I like yours better.
Yeah. And if you don't like it,
be one of the good ones. Be if you don't like it. Ugh.
Okay. So Kat, for your tragic tale in the facts section about how immigration works from South Sudan to the UK.
Oh, it's big gross. Like I get like we should help like asylum should not be, it's just people just need to acknowledge that the world doesn't belong to them. And this like sense of entitlement and privilege that comes, I guess, with being white, which is what all the gross cringe characters were.
All the white characters that you see, the creepy, lady next door. But also, I mean,
she doing?
The little
Stop
black boys
him.
too, though. It was like everyone who had a British accent. We were like, ugh. I
mean, they were, I guess they're not the original colonizers because other people colonized too, but they're like one of the big ones. So, yeah. They did it before it was cool.
Oh, gross.
Yeah, super gross.
No, they did it when people thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Agreed. I agree that that the way that it works for asylum seekers is disgusting, and we need to fix that because no human is illegal, and people should be able to leave, especially when your country is probably a part of why their country is unstable.
And I apologize for laughing. I just do that when I'm nervous or uncomfortable.
Oh no.
So I'm like, whenever there's anything sad, I'm like, can't process emotion. Must laugh.
Yeah.
So
no, totally.
It's not funny. Genuine, like it's not funny. It's sad.
Yeah,
and shouldn't be how it is.
Yes. So. What about for the film?
Oh my god, it was a masterpiece. It should have all the awards. I was, as you say, it was the first time I had been scared in a minute too. Like genuinely, like by everything. Like the whole thing was just like such a beautiful depiction of horror
Yeah.
in like every sense. And I did do a little research on the Apeth and like Sudanese, I guess, tradition or like folklore is that would be considered? Okay. So it seems like they might have been accurate. I read something on Screen Rant, but I didn't want to give my entire facts section to that because I felt like it would make more sense to talk about like the sad things.
Yeah. But it's also nice to have that.
Education, the more you know. But it seemed like it was like really well done, really respectful to like the culture it was pulling from, really authentic to the experiences that actually do happen to people. And just like anything Ruby's in, I forget her real name, but
Winnie.
Yes. Fantastic. Like she's great. So
Absolutely.
It was absolutely astounding. Like
Yeah.
I think this series I like had gone into a lot of films like not doing research beforehand because I just want to watch it and see. I didn't want to like form opinions before it happened, and I've been so like happy outside of Vampires versus the Bronx.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really great, and this film needs to win stuff, and I don't know how to make that happen, but if there are ways,
it's not fully in our hands. But yeah, I agree. Should have got way more. Like I didn't see it on nearly enough top 10 horror lists last year.
Yes.
I did not see it on enough lists, which is so sad. But yeah, I hope people watch it. I hope people watch our series. If this is the first one you're watching, check out the other ones because they're equally heartbreaking and also inspiring. Remember to like, subscribe, review, leave us a comment, please, on iTunes. That means a lot to us and is a way of supporting
our nourishment. It means I can do this as a job.
Yeah. So we can keep doing this that we love. So please do so. And yeah, definitely watch this film. And we have 2 other films in this series before we're wrapping it up to go and take a mental break and do something a little more fun, still spooky, but a little more fun, and have some guests involved. So, just, check them out. And I hope you're enjoying this kind of sad but inspiring journey with us.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like, especially in a lot of our films have been talking about trauma. And I think there's something really healing about acknowledging and like facing trauma. So hopefully it makes people feel like validated or just like, cool, someone's talking about this.
Yeah.
Because it should be being talked about. We're not just like happy, fun times. But yeah.
Well, with that being said, don't get married.
Don't get married.
Delete your kids.
Or, I don't even want to make it.
Yeah, joke. I don't want to make it. I don't want to say what happens. It's too sad. So instead,
I almost did it though.
I did too. I
almost did it.
I mean, we've said some pretty damnable things because we're horror fans, but it's gonna be. But
don't
yes,
get married, delete your kids.
Please enjoy
and
have a good day.
You
Bye.
Bye.